What's up, guys? Welcome back to Devs on a Couch. I'm Andrew.
I'm Mandy.
I'm Scotty.
And today we're going to talk about React Native, React.js, and just kind of dive into the differences, similarities, and what makes them them.
We're also going to answer some common questions that we've seen people ask.
So what is React Native?
Do you want to answer this one, Mandy?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we could start with what React is. So
Very good place.
React is a JavaScript framework that helps you write applications. And then in contrast to that, React Native is pretty similar, but it is used for mobile applications.
Yeah, sounds right.
Yeah, that feels good.
Feels right.
And what is meant by native applications?
Well, I'll go a little bit further into what you were talking about. So React Native is a mobile framework for writing native apps in JavaScript. Typically in the past, you would need to know either Java or Kotlin for Android, or you would need to know Objective-C or Swift to write iOS apps. So what React Native does is it allows you to write native applications, so using your native frameworks and being able to write directly to the device using JavaScript. So if you're a web developer, then you can write apps. You don't need to know Java and Objective-C and all that stuff.
Which is good news for me. I didn't know any mobile development coming into React Native. Only was web. Came from Angular, got into React, did React.js, and then jumped into React Native. What was your first experience with React Native, Mandy?
So I started with, just plain JavaScript, and then I learned React.js, and then switching to React Native, it really wasn't that difficult. I think the main differences were just little syntax things, like not using divs, using views instead, and capitalizing them instead of lowercase. But as far as those little tweaks, having learned React helped me learn React Native.
Yeah, and my first experience, so I actually began as an native Android developer and switched to iOS using Swift. But we had a client project that we were doing two different code bases. So we had one in Swift and then one in Java. When it came to doing the rewrite, we noticed that the Swift app and the Java app they didn't have 100% feature parity. And so what we wanted to do is explore what it would look like to have a single code base so that the Android and the iOS app would be exactly the same. And so it was around that time when React Native, it was probably about a year old at that time. It was getting to be somewhat stable-ish, as far as React Native is stable. We ended up doing a complete rewrite of the app. And it was actually overall a pretty good experience, and it worked on both platforms with some minor changes here and there. But yeah, it was a pretty good experience.
Yeah, I think the thing that I learned about React Native through working on it was that the whole time I was developing, I was focusing mostly on iOS, always testing in that environment. And then once we got to the end, I realized I haven't been trying this in Android, and then ran into some issues. So I had to kind of rework things. So that would be one pointer, is if you really are planning on deploying to both platforms, then test in both as you're going along.
Yes.
Yeah, and Scotty, you mentioned the stability. What is React.js? Its version is in the late teens at this point, right? 17-ish or almost to 17. But React Native isn't to version 1 yet. So that's kind of a consideration to take in when kind of jumping into it, is knowing that, they're not to version 1 yet. It's very powerful, but there may be other options too to consider. What do you do if you need to jump into the actual native code and you don't want to just write in JavaScript or need some more functionality on top of that?
To that question, there are some libraries that third-party developers have created that allow you to add features that would require native code. You have to do what's called linking, and basically it's adding these native libraries to the Android app or to the Objective-C app. But that can be pretty hairy, especially if you've never done mobile development before. The promise of React Native is that you can learn once, you can learn React.js, and you can write it on web or mobile. And kind of our experiences, it's not exactly true. There's enough differences that you have to take some leaps here and there. And if you need to work on native code, it can be a pain, especially if you've never done native development. So you almost, if you're doing a mobile app, you almost, even with React Native, you still need to kind of know what you're doing, because you're going to have to get into Xcode, or you're going to have to get into Android Studio, unless you use Expo. The great thing about Expo is it gives you a lot of the low-level hooks into the native apps that you would normally have to use native code for. So as Mandy mentioned, push notifications is a big one. Mapping is another one. Basically, if you go to expo.io, there's like a full list of all of the packages they include. I always recommend, if someone is building a React Native app, or if they're considering building a React Native app, to first go and look at what Expo gives you for free. Because if you can play in that sandbox, then your life will be way easier. You won't have to fiddle with a lot of the versioning issues that you get. Just with React Native, whenever you start to have to manage all of your code and all of the upgrades and everything else 100% on your own, then it can be a little bit of a bear.
Mm-hmm.
You bring up just what the prerequisites are you need to jump into React Native. Do you think you need to learn React.js before you learn React Native?
I would say no, not necessarily.
Because you didn't. Did you do it at the same time, or were you?
I did JS first and then native. But I would say, like, if you know that you want to do mobile development, then just jump straight into React Native.
Did you find learning React.js, at least on some level, helped you in native?
Yes.
Or was it just that JavaScript helped you in general?
I think learning React.js helped me. But I think it could go the opposite way. If you learn native first, that would help you learn JS.
So, Scotty, what are some of the things that people are asking these days?
Well, I can read it too.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, what programming experience do I need before diving into React Native? Ooh, good question.
Mandy?
I would say to start with a good basis of JavaScript. When I was starting to learn React.js, well, I started learning that, and then I got some advice to learn JavaScript first, which I thought was helpful for me. Just so that way you can differentiate between, okay, this is coming from JavaScript as a whole, this is coming specifically from React.js or React Native. So either path, I would say starting with JavaScript would be probably a good start.
I think from a mobile side, and I was telling Andrew this at lunch today, actually, I thought Android development set me up for success for React Native development. And I think it's because you get used to kind of programming in this resolution independence. You're not really tied to like a pixel width and stuff like that. And so when it comes to Flexbox and some of the other ways of laying out your screens, it just felt very natural to me as a former native Android developer and current.
And I think we touched on before, you don't need to understand React.js before jumping into React Native.
Right.
Understanding JavaScript definitely does help, but I think knowing things like Flexbox, since React.js is heavily dependent on that as well, will definitely help you in React Native, but it wouldn't necessarily be something you have to know in any way, but probably the Android or Swift development, Will my code automatically work from React.js in React Native? The answer, shortly, yes. No. Divs don't work in React Native, no matter how many times you write it.
Facebook says that it's a learn once, write everywhere.
Yeah.
And
that's
it's
in the documentation.
False.
Well, and they're trying to come out with what React Native Web that is supposed to bridge that gap too, but it's even a lower version than React Native.
So in React.js, it's, you have divs and stuff like that, but in React Native, it's a view for one thing. You don't have divs. So you couldn't take just a React.js code base and then just run it on mobile. It just wouldn't work. So it's actually a little worse than that, because in this last project I was working on, some of the components in iOS don't even work in Android, which is a huge pain in the butt. And it was something simple like the text component in React Native was causing Android to fail. That probably gets more back to the instability of React Native than anything else. It's clearly not a 1.0 framework right now. just because there's so many inconsistencies. As Mandy said earlier, you really do have to test all along the way. You can't use React.js code in React Native. So yeah, the promise of learn once, write everywhere, structurally speaking, that's true. Like you can structure components the same way, but the actual code, no.
So are there other frameworks that will allow you to write one code base across all platforms? Mobile, web, native desktop?
No.
I mean, there are a couple, that are coming close. Flutter, we've already talked about in another video. It's trying to kind of bridge that gap in some ways, but is it even worth it to have all your code in one place you're gonna need different things on mobile than you're gonna need in web, and having it all there can just clutter everything, I feel like.
Yeah, I will say that one cool thing, and I know this isn't a Flutter video, but because of the way that Flutter is engineered, it's essentially written like a 2D gaming engine. I can't remember the canvas or what it's called, but the 2D engine that it's written on top of. But I think that's one of the reasons why you have that consistency on Flutter that you don't have with React Native. Just because React Native, it actually goes directly to the base components on both of the platforms. And so I know we're kind of giving the developers grief on the instability, but it is a little bit harder, their approach. So kudos to Google for figuring out a better way to do that.
Well, and that's the thing. Some of the cons we've talked about, instability. I think another con would be just something as simple as not having native navigation within it. You're using third-party navigation within
component libraries.
There's stuff like that. What are some of the pros that you would see within React Native? I would say there's big companies using it. Facebook obviously built on it, so they're going to have that support, and they're constantly upgrading things and trying to figure out this stuff. So I think the support from big companies, but also some open source developer stuff.
And since a lot of people are using it, there's a ton of stuff out on Stack Overflow you can find if you need answers. There's a lot when you Google it. And if you're taking React Native compared to writing native code itself,
it is way easier. I know JavaScript, so I can write in React Native.
Yeah.
It's definitely faster. It's just not a silver bullet. I don't think that React Native is a great fit if you need a highly performant app. It's good, like I always say, it's good for CRUD apps, which honestly, I don't know. I can make up a percentage, but 93.5% of all apps are CRUD apps. Most apps are just connecting to a server. You're reading and writing information. And so if your app is that, then React Native is great for that. For the most part, most of the apps that we've written with it are those type of apps, and we've had great success with it, and clients have been super happy. However, if you need something more performant, I know in our previous video, the Flutter video, we talked a lot about animations and just that fluid 60 frame per second UI. Then, I would probably lean toward Flutter. Even in our little bit of knowledge about Flutter right now, just Flutter's better for that. Or if you need to write a game or something like that, then you want to use native code. You don't really want to do one of these cross-platform tools.
So if you were wanting to start from scratch on a native app and not use React Native or Flutter or any of these other frameworks, what languages would you be writing in for iOS, Android, Windows?
On Windows Phone?
Sure. The Windows Phone. Remember Windows?
For Android, most of it can be written in Java or Kotlin now, but there's configuration in XML. So I would say that you definitely want to be familiar with Java and XML for Android. For iOS, it's Objective-C or Swift. I think that's pretty much it. The rest of it is really just becoming super familiar with Xcode and the tool chains. On an iOS project, you probably need to become familiar with Carthage or CocoaPods. I think most people are using CocoaPods. On Android, you need to know Java and XML, but you also need to be somewhat familiar with Gradle and that whole build process.
All right, thank you guys so much for watching, and we're going to be coming out with more content. The next video is going to be an intro to React, so be sure to subscribe below so that you don't miss that, and give us a thumbs up.
Bye.